Okay, a while back somebody asked if I would have the Punisher take on Deathstroke. And I did some reading for this, and I also thought about another fight, which would have been Spider-Man versus Deathstroke. As always, I hit a bunch of different forums, and I read other people's basic sort of thoughts, and then I try to read some of the different wikis and all that to get a good idea of what some of the feats are. Try to read, a couple books here and there where they show, some slightly better moments, some worse moments to kind of gauge. Okay, well, if at this point in time he was able to defeat, Hulk pretty easily, but then he gets beaten up by like some random street thugs. Trying to get the overall sort of balance between the two characters. And when it comes to the Punisher, yeah, the Punisher has had a book where he's killed everybody. Like Galactus on up. He's had a couple of books where he's actually killed pretty much everybody because he's got the tools to do it. And there's times when someone like, Dakin just flat out annihilates him. Deathstroke. Deathstroke has gone to the point where he is almost defeated the entire team of the X-Men and the Teen Titans at the same time. He had a great showing against the Justice League. But he also was stalemated in a sword fight against Green Arrow. When you see that fight in its context, you know that Green Arrow actually did prep work against Deathstroke, and then put him in a no-win situation to defeat him. Okay. So, interesting. So, I decided to go with Punisher versus Deathstroke, because you have two people who are somewhat similar. They both have that kind of soldier of fortune sort of feel to them. And as always, I do this through a 9-criteria system. Intelligence, findability, strength, speed, durability. This is, do you have a healing factor? What sort of a level of stamina do you have? And vulnerability. This is, what sort of body armor are you wearing? Do you have a natural resiliency in your skin? Energy projection. This is your, what sort of bizarre raw power do you have at range? Versatility, and then overall X factor. So being with intelligence. Punisher, great detective work. It's fantastic detective work. Taking on somebody who uses 90% of his brain. There's one thing that everyone does bring up when it comes to Deathstroke. It is how ridiculously intelligent he is. I know he's a great tactician on his feet, and does a fantastic job when it comes to planning. So, just based off that alone, Deathstroke takes number 1. Fighting ability. You've got the Punisher, who's got a tremendous amount of military experience when it comes to their forms of martial arts, versus somebody who's been trained by pretty much the best people in the world, and does have most people put Deathstroke in about his 40s to 60s, where most people pretty much kind of put Frank Castle in about his late 30s, maybe early 40s. So you're looking at someone who's also got probably a couple of years of experience on him. So I'm going to find ability edge to Deathstroke. Deathstroke, ironically, has undergone pretty close to the DC equivalent of the Super Soldier Serum. So he's got enhanced strength. You're probably thinking, but Deathstroke, now we're up to speed. You're probably thinking now Deathstroke is a little bit older. However, due to all of his enhancements that he's had throughout the majority of his life, he is actually at slightly above peak human when it comes to overall speed. So he does actually have a speed advantage. Durability. Deathstroke has a healing factor. Ironically, in one of his earlier books, now I have to say post-crisis, pre-52, he took a bullet in the face. And the commentary was, if you were to not be immortal, this would have killed you. So beyond having a very high healing factor, he's functionally immortal. I had to put that against the insane level of pain tolerance that you see from somebody like Punisher. Punisher had multiple bones broken and stayed conscious. That's very impressive. Against a normal human, he would definitely have the durability advantage. However, I think the fact that someone can get shot multiple times in non-body armored locations and still stand, that means durability is definitely got to go to Deathstroke. And vulnerability. Here's what it comes down to. What sort of armor do you tend to wear? Deathstroke normally ends up wearing things that are of a Prometheus armor. So that means he's got something that takes a tremendous amount of medium caliber bullets. This is someone who could take shotgun blasts. This is someone who can even take abilities of superhumans and is still relatively okay. You do see a pretty solid amount of armor coming from Punisher, but he's normally wearing things that are pretty good for small arms, as well as for knives, for your more relatively mundane sort of things. He's normally not out hunting superhumans. When he is, he gears appropriately. In this sort of scenario, this is pretty much two guys with their normal gear dropped off. So you've got someone who's got a higher level of normal armor, because of who he's normally dealing with, for someone who's dealing with more street-level thugs. So, therefore, when it comes to invulnerability, you gotta give that to Deathstroke. Energy projection. This one, if it would have been before Secret Invasion, it's Deathstroke. However, post-Secret Invasion, Punisher found a nice cachet of Skrull weaponry. So he occasionally has a couple of Skrull-based weapons on him. So he does have some pretty fancy toys. Versatility. This one, of course, is going to get Deathstroke. He's normally referred to as the Batman of supervillains. It's like Prometheus is the Batman of supervillains. If you were to go with the normal weaponry that he's commonly walking around with, he's got an energy staff that allows him to do multiple things. It's pretty much a Deus Ex Machina weapon. Not to mention his Prometheus sword, which can cut through virtually anything, save for adamantium. Not to mention all the little tricks and gadgets he normally keeps on him. So he's going to have a little bit more random stuff that he's walking around with. Last one, of course, is X Factor. I'm going to give X Factor, ironically, to Punisher. Because in this sort of scenario, Punisher's a hard guy to take down. You know, when he fought, you know, it's either Dokken or Drake, and whoever Wolverine's potential bisexual child is. You know, Drake had to decapitate him. You know, this is someone who takes a tremendous beating. And this is somebody who, in non-canon, has defeated Galactus. So he does have the ability to pull off the bizarre, almost miracle win. If these two were to fight more often than not 7-2, it's going to be Deathstroke. Now, I mentioned earlier that I wanted to do some other fights. I am starting to run into this really big problem. Marvel doesn't do reboots. So if you do some with Spider-Man, Spider-Man has pretty close to 2,000 appearances. That means you can pretty easily go through those 2,000 appearances, pick bits and pieces, and be like, well, he could beat anybody. Yes, I too have read the book where Spider-Man fought Superman and did a pretty decent job about it. Of course, he was also bathed in red solar radiation, but was still able to physically hit Superman, which he should not be able to do. Spider-Man was also originally ideal to have a decent amount of strength, not the anywhere from 50 to 70 ton person he is now, as well as be intellectually gifted. Currently, he is now a genius level that rivals Reed Richards and Pym. Initially, he was more of a street brawler, because when he was a nerd growing up, he didn't have martial arts training. Now, all of a sudden, most people have him ranked as an expert hand-to-hand fighter because of, you know, a couple of storylines where he actually combined all of his abilities to make his own martial arts style. Okay. He's defeated Firelord during the time when he beat everybody. He's beaten Hulk on a couple of occasions. He's done a pretty good job taking out other individuals. If you look at the DC universe, you have several divisions. You know, if I were to say, well, you know, those are post-crisis feats, you can't use those. Okay, now we're hitting the schism where it's, well, that was post-Flashpoint New 52. New 52 characters are written entirely differently. So now all of a sudden this massive amount of information you could pull from to make the rational arguments one way or another is almost entirely invalidated, unless, of course, you go for the very specific character descriptions. Which is why when I could ask, you know, if I would do like Rune Lord King Thor, which is a very specific storyline, very specific style of Thor, versus, you know, Hunter Brave Doomsday, very specific storyline, very specific moveset when it comes to Doomsday. So I was thinking now I'll probably have to start doing very, very specific sort of scenarios. Like, instead of being, Punisher versus, like Lobo, it'll be like Frankencastle versus Lobo. Instead of Spider-Man versus... Okay, Spider versus Deathstroke. I'll have to say, post-crisis, pre-52 Deathstroke versus Spider-Man from the others. So I took a very specific storyline, therefore removing some information before that was contradictory, and then things that came afterwards. Like if I were to pick Iron Fist. If I were to pick 70s era Iron Fist before he became the immortal weapon of the Agamotto, now all of a sudden he's got a very defined moves list. If I just say Iron Fist, then I've got everything from pretty much like the 1970s on up to now. All the times when he's lost his powers, gotten his powers back, had different sorts of powers augmented to him. The way that he is now in the white suit as opposed to how he fought in the red suit or in the green suit. So in the future I'll probably start doing much more specific ones. So that way then it makes it easier instead of trying to go through, thousands of pages of information to try to make the most perfect and defined idea of what my opinion should be while keeping it somewhat malleable. Instead of trying to go through all that and trying to make the absolute, perfect argument as opposed to making arguments that are, in my mind, fairly substantial, but still not as perfect as some people, of course, would like them to be.